Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Maureen Aylward, and I'll be your MC. Welcome to FishTales Boundaries. I just wanted to say a few words about how amazing it is to see everyone here and what it says about the power of storytelling. That you would come out in the middle of a pandemic, because we're still in one, donning masks and being socially distant, to come and hear some stories and the power of community and the power of resilience. So congratulations, everyone, for being here tonight in support of storytelling and also the Gloucester Writers Center. Thank you. I want to thank Leila Goodman for all of her amazing work this year as storyteller in residence. She has just brought storytellers together at the Gloucester Stage Company and here tonight. And Leila, thank you so much. Would you like to come up and say something?
I just want to say boundaries. We've all lived with a lot of them. And tonight we just hope you can enjoy hearing some stories about boundaries that help us think in different ways. And stories have the power to heal and to make us laugh, to make us cry, and to connect us. So thank you all for coming out to hear a collection of some really great stories tonight.
A couple of other special thank yous. One to the North Shore Arts Association and Linda Coates. We have been trying to come to this amazing, beautiful place for a couple of years, and sometimes it just hadn't worked out. But this year, it really worked out. So Linda, thank you so much for having us back. And also to the Mass Cultural Council and the City of Gloucester for sponsoring the Cultural Splash, because this is one of the shows in that series, so thanks to them. Another shout out to Alex Berger, who has been doing a workshop for our storytellers quite some time, and all of our stories have been inspired and gained a lot of insight from Alex, and so we hope that he will continue to do that. And if you ever needed any kind of help with storytelling, Alex is your guy. So thank you, Alex. And to our ever-present Henry Farini, who's keeping the Gloucester Writers Center afloat and going even during a pandemic. And we're in the middle of an amazing restoration of 126 Main Street, and we look forward to seeing you back at Gloucester Writers Center at some time. And now to our lineup. Our first storyteller is Heidi Wakeman, and Heidi is a Spanish teacher at the O'Malley Middle School in Gloucester. I heard that she was also a student at Rockport High School, and she's going to take us into the Wayback Machine. So Heidi, come on up and tell a story.
So nice to see everybody. You are going to love this story. The place, Rockport High School. The year, 1986. The characters, 16-year-old Heidi Wakeman, her 21-year-old boyfriend, Josh Tobin, and ex-nun, honors English teacher, Anne Gallagher. Anne Gallagher had assigned us a story to write about something we'd had a changing relationship with. Could be anything. So as a young feminist, I thought, well, maybe I'll write about my breasts. And I did. These uninvited guests came into my life at age 10, and by the ripe age of 16, I'd already come into a changing relationship with them. Before, they'd been sort of shameful, and I was embarrassed, and then after winning a bikini contest at Long Beach Hotel, I was like, well, they're pretty good. I think I'll keep them. And Anne Gallagher loved this paper. She asked me to read it in front of the class. I earned an A-. Nothing like reading a paper about your breasts in front of your senior class to feel a little bit on the spot. But I was proud, and I felt like it showed my depth and my burgeoning career as a writer, and also somebody who was interested in gender representation. Fast forward, the last quarter of senior year. A second paper assigned by Ann Gallagher. She said, write an ode to anything. Well, my boyfriend, also a former student of Ann Gallagher, said, she liked that paper about your breasts. Why don't you write a paper about my penis? You laugh. So I did. This was an amazing paper, 1 page long, 5 paragraphs, filled with beautiful detail from the flame red pubic hair to the difference between the turgid and flaccid state to the anatomical miracle of each ejaculation. I thought it was great. Ann Gallagher did not. The paper was returned to me with those 2 dreaded words, see me. I went to see her, and she said, Heidi, you have 2 choices. You can rewrite the paper for something more appropriate, or you can accept the grade, which is an F. It was the last quarter of senior year. I'd already been accepted to Bard College, and I didn't know what to do. Getting an F would make me fail the quarter and bring down my average to a C for the year. I sought counsel from 2 feminist teachers here in the audience tonight, Leila Goodman and Barbara Kelly. And I don't remember exactly what their advice was to me, but I do remember they acknowledged my concern, my conflict, and what I should do. I do know that they listened to me and validated what I saw as a double standard. Did she like my paper because she was a closeted lesbian? Was she a man-hating nun? I didn't really know. But I appreciated that they listened to me, and I really appreciate that they're here listening to this story. So I took the F. I did not rewrite my paper. And I went on to Bard College and continue to write to this day. A few years after graduation, Ann Gallagher passed on, and I went to her funeral. And I wanted to say thank you to her for teaching me the value of research. She took me to the Boston Public Library during senior year before this incident. I wanted to thank her for teaching me how to accept the consequences of artistic freedom. And I wanted to thank her for saying, or telling me to never introduce a speech with anything more than, you are gonna love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. Our next storyteller is one of 11 children, which is pretty remarkable. Ray Daniels is actually a very remarkable person. He's a classical composer. He plays the trombone. He's a music teacher and an accomplished academic. Ray, please come up and tell your story about your daughter's boundaries.
I'm an educator, so when I think of September, I always think of the fall semester, and January being the beginning of the second semester, and that's when our story takes place. So during this time, my daughter Zoe was in Zoom school, and it was time to kind of restock for school supplies. So I decided to go to Michael's, one of my favorite places, and buy some wonderful things. I got glue and all sorts of construction papers and sorts of things, and I found this really great art set, had pencils and pens and all this in it, and I knew that she would really love it. But my daughter Zayla would feel a little bit left out if I didn't get something for her. So typically I get them something that's very similar, but this time I knew that Zayla wouldn't appreciate these particular things. Zayla's a sculptor, so I got this great Play-Doh set. She had Play-Doh, but it was kind of crumbly and it was old. So I got her new Play-Doh, and I found this A-frame whiteboard, chalkboard, kind of little duet, which was great. So about a week after I gave them these things, Zoe and I were in this deep conversation. And our conversations sometimes resemble debates. My daughters are quite respectful, but we oftentimes dig deep into trying to figure out the workings of the universe and how to solve humanity's problems. And apparently, on this particular day, I was not getting it because she thought that I needed a visual aid. And so she asked her sister, Zayla, if she could use her whiteboard to draw an example for me. Zayla was looking down at her Play-Doh, and she was making this masterpiece of a sculpture, and without looking up, she said, no. And I was like, why not? And she said, well, it's not time, and it's mine, and I get to say who can use my things and who doesn't. And I was like, what? And so you have to understand, I try to teach my children to share. We try to follow the golden rule as the fabric of our home. And as a single parent, I want to make sure that my children are coming up, and at least in a way that resembles something that's sincere to us. So I said to Zayla, wouldn't you want someone to share with you? And she said, yes. And I said, what if I didn't share with you? And she looked up at me, and she started to cry. And that was not the response that I was looking for. I actually, you have to understand, my great-grandfather was born a slave, and he was a sharecropper. My grandfather had 19 children, and he bought that farm. My dad, not 11 kids, had 12. My mom and dad had 12 children. And so you can see the business plan, the business model here. The interesting thing about it is that although we owned everything, we didn't have anything. We didn't own anything ourselves. In our home, it was partly a monarchy and socialism. You know, my mom and dad were the king and queens. We were the prince and princesses, and we were the serfs. So we didn't own anything. So I talked to my friend Lisa about this, and Lisa's like, "Oh, you guilted her." She says, that's a technique from a Jewish mom. She says, I like that. She says, and you know, believe it or not, I actually took a little solace when she said that. But I was still conflicted. Well, a couple of weeks later, Zoe and I got into this deep conversation, and we were trying to solve the problems of the universe and try to figure out the problems of humanity. And apparently I wasn't getting it because I needed a visual aid. And so she said to Zayla, may I use your whiteboard to explain this to Dad? And Zayla said, yes. And I was like, really, why? She says, with the wisdom of a 90-year-old, she said, because if I said no, I'll get in trouble anyway. So I sat by Zayla, and I said, you know, I am the king of this house, just remember. I felt like I needed to establish some authority, because I didn't really have any. And I said to her, I have been thinking about what you said previously, and I relent on this position. I do think you're right. I think that you get to determine who can use your things and when they get to use them. And I think I felt the power of my kingship flow to my princesses. And for the next couple of months, I saw them wield the sword of no back and forth through the house like it was nobody's business. But what Zayla taught me is that saying no does not mean that you don't share or you don't live by the golden rule. Saying no says that you can determine the destiny of your belongings and your own things. And that's what I have taken away from my daughter's boundaries. Thank you, Zayla. That's my story.
Speaking of wisdom from a 90-year-old, I am really excited to introduce Virginia McKinnon. Virginia was our very first storyteller in residence for FishTales all those many years ago, 9 years ago now, Virginia. And she has been telling stories at FishTales ever since. So welcome back to the FishTales stage, Virginia McKinnon.
I'm writing a book titled A Gloucester Fisherman's Daughter and Growing Up Sicilian American. And this story was told to me by my mother, Mary Piscatello Frontiero, and my dad, Michael Frontiero, of events that happened in Gloucester in 1926. My dad was walking home from work, and there was a widower that approached him on the corner of Commercial Street down the fort. And he said to my dad, he said, "See that girl across the street? I'm going to kidnap her. I'm going to elope and marry her. She'll make a wonderful wife, a wonderful mother for my 2 little boys." Well, when my dad looked to see who this young girl was, it was my mom. And she was only 15 years old. And my mom lived at 33 Commercial Street, and that's where the Chamber of Commerce building is now, down the fort in central Gloucester, Massachusetts, where many Sicilian fishermen settled to be near the waterfront. My mom was, at that time, one of 9 children, and later there were 11 children in her family. And she was dedicated in caring for her siblings. She usually had a washcloth in her hand, washing dirty hands and faces. And this widow's little boys was so unkempt, she felt sorry for them, and sometimes she would wash their face and hands too. So my dad couldn't, he had watched my mother grow up, and he was waiting for her to be a little older before revealing his love for her. So he approached my mom's parents, and he told them of the widower's intentions. And this was quite common at that time. So my dad said he would agree to a long courtship, and a wedding would not be planned until my mom was ready for marriage. Well, my mom's parents agreed because they were afraid of this widower's intentions. Now, my mom's dad, Salvatore Piscatello, he went and found this widower, and he revealed to him that he had friends in the mafia in Boston, and any act on his account would have grievous consequences. So now my dad was visiting my mom, and he wasn't allowed to sit next to her. And after a year of this courtship, my dad approached my mom's parents, and he said, I've been here for 1 year now in this courtship, and if you don't trust me to sit next to your daughter, well, I'm leaving. So my dad left. Well, my mom says she started to cry because she had fallen in love with my dad, and she knew she was the envy of many girls down the fort, because my dad was so handsome and she was so beautiful as well. So my grandfather, the Salvatore Piscatello, he went down the wharf looking for my dad, and he apologized for being so strict. So a wedding was planned. It was before my mom's 18th birthday. They were married January 1st, 1928. Well, the wedding receptions at that time were usually held at the groom's home. But my dad lived at 13 Beach Court. It was the last house on the right, just before Pavilion Beach. And so my dad's father, Paul Frontero, he rented a hall, and he hired the Roma band from Boston to play at the wedding reception. Well, the Roma band could only play marches and concert music. And of course, my parents' friends were disappointed because they wanted to dance. So my mom's dad, luckily, he found Tony Gentile. And Tony came with his orchestra, and they knew all the latest dance music, the Charleston and all. And their wedding reception was a grand success. It was the bands with either side of the hall, and they took turns playing the music. So now, in 1926, how could an older man kidnap a 15-year-old girl? Well, my mom stated to me this was very common at that time. She said on the very street where I grew up, there were 2 women on that street that had been victims. And once they were violated, of course, no other man would want to marry them. So their choice was to be a spinster or to marry this older man and have a family life. There just being no boundaries and no consequences. Thankfully, laws have changed. and I didn't have to worry about my 5 daughters being kidnapped. And now, at 92 years old, I'm writing my stories, I'm writing my memoirs, I'm writing about my parents, and writing about Gloucester. And I'm writing lots of stories in my book that I hope will be cherished by future generations.
Thank you, Virginia. It's always a pleasure to hear you tell your stories. Our next storyteller is Gab Watling. She is a very funny and beloved professor at Endicott College, and she's going to take us to Australia.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, let me just organize my headband here. It's very important. Okay, so this is the story of 17-year-old me longing desperately to be part of an adult, a sophisticated adult world. I grew up in Cairns in North Queensland, the Mississippi of Australia, as we refer to it. And like the Mississippi of America, Cairns is hot, it's tropical, it's fertile, and it attracts odd people. Many of these odd people were Americans. They would arrive in yachts. We had a beautiful inlet. They would arrive in their yachts. They were tan, they were glamorous, they had opaque backstories. They asked nothing of us, and we asked nothing of them. They'd stay for a few months, and then suddenly their yachts would be gone. So they had their own lives, but they certainly sort of added some texture to ours. As it happened, though, my best friend was also a kind of an unusual person. She was a local girl, but she managed to turn herself into a society princess, a society celebrity, the minute she graduated from high school. She knew everybody, she was beautiful, she was at all of the major events. One of the people that she connected with was a yacht broker. I don't know what a yacht broker is. But anyway, this yacht broker was very taken with Donna and thought that she would be perfect for his life, that he would move her into his house and he would turn her into his domestic organizer. She would entertain his clients, she would make sure that the cupboards were full of food and that kind of thing. This could not be further from Donna's own ambitions. Donna herself much preferred to lie around the pool and wait for people to bring things to her. So pretty quickly, the yacht broker decided he needed to move Donna offshore. Now, he was in the right business. He knew people with offshore vessels. So, and as luck would have it, there was a particularly fine yacht in the inlet that had been abandoned, more or less, by its shady, American, glamorous, tanned owner. He'd just disappeared. And he'd left the yacht in charge of his girlfriend, who was also a local girl. Now, this poor girl, who was in her mid-20s, had no idea how to look after a giant luxury yacht. She was by herself. And so the yacht broker organised for Donna to move on board and help Anne, the girl on the yacht, to wash down the decks and do boaty things. Now, for me, this was, it had opportunity written all over it. This was my entree to, fabulous, sophisticated adult life. And so I rode Donna's coattails across the inlet in the rubber Zodiac with the outboard motor and installed myself on the Pine Nui, the fabulous yacht. Anne also invited some cousins, her cousin Rosemary and Rosemary's new husband over, because sadly Rosemary and her new husband had recently suffered a tragedy. Their first child had been born with major physical abnormalities and did not survive beyond an hour after birth. So it was thought that moving Rosemary and her husband out to the yacht would give them some space, it would be sort of recuperative, and so we were happy to bring them into our little yacht family. The yacht broker helped in the process of recuperation by providing us with some tickets to a costume party. And this was sort of the pivot. We pivoted towards this new project. What were we going to go as to this society costume party? Donna and I very quickly decided, well, naughty schoolgirl, it wasn't much of a stretch, so that was taken care of. Our lovely Anne, for reasons that we still don't understand, wanted to go as Bo Peep. But Rosemary and her husband were having difficulty trying to work out what they were going to go as. Would they go as a couple in a pair costume? Would they go individually? In my innocent, ardent, desperate to be noticed and recognized way, I blurted out, I know, why don't you go as Rosemary from Rosemary's Baby? You know, one of those moments, I was talking to my hairdresser today and she said, oh my God, I know exactly what you mean. You can see the words coming out and you just want to grab them and put them back again. That was the moment. At that time, I recognized exactly what I had said, the horribleness of what I had said. I wanted to be as far from sophisticated adult society as possible. I wanted to throw myself into the outgoing tide. I wanted to be washed into the mouth of the local man-eating crocodile, having been bitten by many venomous sea snakes and savaged by a pod of tiger sharks, and I still do. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Jay DePrima to the stage. Jay is a local actor and producer, and he's going to tell us a story to remember.
Boundaries. Yes, you've just broken the fourth wall. 2001, sitting by a pool on the deck of a cruise ship, drinking pina coladas. I began to tally all the missing parts of my body. Our friend, we call her our angel, had booked a cruise ship for us, for me, my wife, and our 13-year-old daughter, all the way from New Orleans, along the Mississippi, to the Yucatan Peninsula and back. It was great. It was beautiful. Imagine, she knew exactly what we needed. A cruise ship that could accommodate a wheelchair, no muss, no fuss. A cruise ship that would ask nothing of us and give us everything. Time together, no hospitalizations, no responsibilities, food and drink at our beck and call, and comfortable beds. Comfortable beds that would rock us to sleep at night on the Mississippi. I had to take inventory on that cruise. So I took a journal with me, and I began to make a list of parts that were missing. Let's see, my left leg is amputated above the knee. My right leg, or more accurately, my right hip and groin is in a state of constant irritation, which without drugs would be unbearable. My current condition of mobility, my good leg has an arthritic hip with an aggravated groin and necrotic bone structure throughout, muscle contraction caused by atrophy, peripheral neuropathy from the ankle to the toenails, and a foot that has plantar fasciitis, and a partridge in a pear tree. In short, my good leg is a perfectly functioning stick leg with some circulation, flesh, and plenty of pain. In short, I'm fucked. My disability. It had been several years that I was inside and outside of hospitals, struggling for my life and near death several times. First, from leukemia, and secondly, from MRSA infection, nasty staph infection that situated itself in my left leg, and despite all the antibiotics, we could not get rid of it. So, this is the result. On return to New Orleans, we discovered that there was a jazz festival. And of course, gospel, blues, jazz, rock even, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Al Jarreau, Diana Krall, Blind Boys of Alabama, and it was great. I was concerned that I couldn't be able to see the music in a wheelchair, but New Orleans has their act together. A lot of the veterans allowed clear passage to the sides of the stage so I could see and hear everything, and it was all good. So therefore, overcome. I love music, and music makes me want to dance. So during the concert, I found that I could actually stand and begin to move as well. And I began to imagine that I could teach again, for it had been 3 years that I'd been in and out of the hospitals. And teaching is a passion of mine. And without it, I would lose some hope. So, and believe it or not, middle schoolers can give you some energy. So, I had an interview with Dr. Hutch. It was great. I came in a wheelchair, and I presented my portfolio and told him all the things that I had done. And I told him then at the end, I said, I'm between a wheelchair and a walker. And he looked at me and he said, can you do the job? If only our world could be that great, right? Just, no drama, no prejudice. Just, can you do the job? Yes, I could. So that fall, as I was getting ready to teach, I was in the wheelchair, and I'm trying to tie my shoes, and my wife was helping me, and we looked at each other. I said, is this all there is? Is this what it means? Back to work, normalcy, whatever that means. But we had passed across many barriers at that time in our life. We knew that we challenged the notion of what is normal. We had discovered that life was a lot more than what we had taken for granted, that we challenged the notion or the vanity of striving. And we had thought, isn't it just about being present in the moment with each other? We had learned that through 3 years of hospitalization, near death, and laying together, nestling like puppies in the hospital bed. And we thought, there's got to be more to this. So we had learned that we somehow transcended the boundaries of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Our next storyteller is our storyteller in residence, an accomplished storyteller, I must say, Leila Goodman. Leila's going to bring us into a moment where she recognized something that's been very important in her life. Leila, come on up.
First, isn't this just so great? I'm having so much fun just listening. Oh yeah, I have a story to tell. Most people, or many people, if you ask, what's your faith practice, will answer, I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm spiritual and religious, but it wasn't always that way. I was born to 2 Jewish parents, and like many parents of Jewish Eastern European immigrants, they chose to disconnect from Jewish practice in order to more easily assimilate as white Americans. So I grew up in a house with very little to almost zero Jewish practice. My parents did find it somehow important to send us to really boring Hebrew school, And I was bat mitzvahed, but it was not a meaningful experience. But I was a seeker. I yearned for spiritual connection. And I tried all sorts of things. And in high school, I discovered Eastern religion and philosophy. And by the time I was 18, I was sure that anyone who was religious was stupid. But I still sought out spiritual experiences. I called myself, still do, an ecumenical Jew. I was open to all traditions. I liked all kinds of ritual. I could be sitting in a cathedral in Europe with organ music and light pouring in through stained glass windows and just be stirred, or listen to a gospel choir at a Southern Baptist black church and have my soul on fire. So in my late 20s, I got married and started to have a family, and like many people that age, somehow I felt it important to pass on something of my Jewishness. And luckily, with the warm and welcoming community of Temple Ahavat Achim right here in Gloucester, I learned about how to do Jewish in ways I had never known, like Shabbat dinner, family Shabbat dinner, and blessing our children. And I started to explore a little more. So in the year 2000, I got a sabbatical from the school where I was teaching, and I decided to take every Wednesday to just do spiritual reflection and practice. Some parents, upon hearing about this, gifted me with a day at a Christian retreat center where I'd get a cabin and get a lovely lunch made for me. And this sounded really nice. So on an early, cold spring morning, I dropped my kids off at school. I drove out to the retreat center, and I walked into the little welcoming center, and a kind young monk in robes greeted me, and he said, "Well, as you probably know, today is Ash Wednesday, and so we're all fasting, so there will be no lunch." Okay, I said, nicely hiding the gigantic disappointment of my fantasized lunch. He went on. Everybody here takes a vow of silence, so if you see anyone on the trails, please don't speak to them. Check, that was easy. And we strongly encourage all guests to join us for Eucharist at 12. As I was making my way to my cabin, I was thinking, Eucharist. I really wasn't, what is Eucharist? I wasn't sure. I mean, my entire Christian education was listening to Jesus Christ Superstar over and over. No. So, but the cabin was super cute. It had a wood stove, it had wood. I unpacked my art supplies, found a granola bar and a half bag of chips in the car. I started a fire, started a collage around my identity and change over time. Went for a long, beautiful hike on the Merrimack River. Mindfully ate my granola bar and my chips. And a little before noon, I made my way back down toward the chapel. As I neared the chapel, I could hear singing, this beautiful chanting. And I walked in this simple little chapel, and there were about 7 monks singing in this beautiful, rich chord of harmony, just beautiful. There were about 5 or 6 other guests. I sat down and closed my eyes and just let this beautiful sound pour through me. The singing stopped after a while, and the monk/priest got up and got out the wine and the wafers. I knew about wafers. And then the first monk approached, and he put the wafer in his mouth, and then he dipped his hand in some ashes and put an X on his forehead. I was so intrigued. I was like an anthropologist in a foreign world. Like, what? This ritual is so fascinating. At about monk 3, I realized, oh, Ash Wednesday. And it was actually a cross, not an X. But after all the monks went, the first guests lined up. And then I got a little nervous. I crossed my hands and took a small step back. And then all the guests lined up. And all I could imagine were thousands and thousands of Jews over the centuries forced to take communion or choosing to take communion with the blind idea that maybe that would save their lives. And I took a few more steps back until I was plastered against the back of the wall. My body language as closed as possible. And in my head, I was screaming, "I'm a Jew! I'm a Jew! I'm a Jew!" The priest, when he was finished with everyone except me, walked over very gently, and he said, "Can I give you a blessing?" Okay. He put his hand on my head and he said, "May the presence of God be with you." I walked out and I really felt the presence of God. And at a Christian retreat center on Ash Wednesday, I came to understand that my lack of boundaries that left me open to all ritual and all tradition had actually closed me to owning my own identity and to exploring my own tradition deeply. On that day, I began the journey of binding myself to Jewish ritual practice, and I stand here before you today, a spiritual and religious Jew.
Storyteller in residence, Leila Goodman. Thank you, Leila. Our next storyteller is Anne Driscoll, and I heard that Anne Driscoll likes to refer to herself as an accidental writer. And then I learned a little bit more about Anne, and actually it sounds like she's really an accomplished writer. She's been on the Moth stage, she's been a TEDx speaker, and she's written for People magazine, so those are pretty good credentials, eh? She's going to tell a story about how boundaries are complicated. Anne, come on up.
For years, I worked for People magazine, covering human interest and breaking news stories all over New England, and sometimes as far as Montreal or Puerto Rico, Bermuda, and even Wales. But the truth is, I had no training whatsoever as a journalist. In fact, I was a licensed social worker with a journalism problem. And I blame it all on Ben Affleck. Somehow or another, I ended up being the queen of the Ben Affleck beat. And a lot of it was fun, I'm going to admit it. I got paid to go to Red Sox games, and I would report such gripping details as how many hot dogs Ben ate while he sat in John Henry's private box. I also got paid to canvass the bars in Cambridge, chat up the bartenders, drink beer, in order to find out whether or not Ben had imbibed there. But it came eventually to the point that my role as a reporter clashed miserably with my ethics as a social worker. And I had really the most existential crisis of my life. What happened was one night, I got a call from my source who lived on Cottage Street in Cambridge, which is where Ben's mother lived, and where Ben would invariably show up whenever he was in town. I'm going to confess something. My source was a 13-year-old girl. In my defense, her parents knew about our arrangement and approved. So this one night she called me and said that Ben was around, and my editors asked me to go to Cottage Street and, stake out Ben's mother's house. So I sat there, and for a long time, and eventually Ben's mother's boyfriend showed up, laden down with all these takeout bags, and went into her house. And then the rain came. And then the Red Sox game got canceled. So I knew Ben wasn't going to be going to any Red Sox game that night. And I had absolutely nothing to report. But eventually, 2 young guys came out of Ben's mother's house, and they looked to be about Ben's age. And one was tall and one was short, and they got into a car and they started driving off. And in that split second, I thought, oh my God, these could be Ben's friends, and Ben could be meeting them somewhere. I better follow them. So I did. I followed them around Cambridge, around crowded Cambridge, around crowded Harvard Square in Cambridge, and eventually they pulled into an open space, parking space, and miraculously there was a parking space a couple of spaces behind them, and so I pulled in too. They got out of the car and they went over, and there was a young woman waiting for them outside of Grendel's den, and the three went inside and I followed. And when I went into Grendel's den, I saw that they were sitting at the bar. There was the tall man, the woman, and the short man. And I sat next to the tall man because there was an open seat there. And I immediately realized this is a really stupid idea. There is no way on earth Ben is meeting them here. And I have absolutely nothing to report. Now, at this point, I had been covering Ben so long that I knew all of Ben's circle of friends. There were about six friends that he had gone to school with. And I had most of their phone numbers. And many of them actually talked to me both on and off the record, but I had never met any of them before. So while I sat there, I thought, geez, if I knew that these were Ben's friends, I could at least report Ben hung out at his mother's house with his high school friends and they had takeout. I know, Pulitzer Prize material. But I didn't want to blow my cover, and I didn't know how I was going to confirm that these actually were his friends. But then I remembered, I looked, and the short guy that was sitting furthest away from me had a wedding band on. And I knew from my reporting that only one of Ben's friends was married, so I had a hunch that it was probably him. But I didn't really want to go tap on his shoulder and ask him. So I was trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do this? And then I remembered, I have his phone number. So I very discreetly took out my phone. I'm sitting 3 people away from him, called him, and watched while he took out his phone to answer. I had my confirmation. I also had reached my breaking point. You might not be surprised to know that People magazine didn't publish any of that really stop the press's story, but it really was a turning point for me, and I thought, I cannot do this anymore. I'm done. I've reached my limit. Well, weirdly, right about that time, a woman who used to call me all the time to pitch stories to me, she ran a public relations firm that specialized in representing nonprofits. She happened to call me, and I also happened to know that she was looking to hire somebody. So she invited me to lunch, and I went, and it was like so casual. I didn't even bring a resume, but by the time I walked out of that restaurant, I was vice president of business development. I know nothing about business development. Even weirder, about a month or 2 after that, I was doing business developing, meeting with a prospective client at a hotel in Cambridge, and we were waiting for a third person, and it was just he and I, and so I was just making small talk, and I said to him, so where do you live? And he said, oh, I live in Cambridge. And I said, oh, do you like it? And he said, well, I do, he said, except that the paparazzi are always sitting outside of my house. And I said, do you live on Cottage Street? And he went, yes, how did you know? And I said, because I was one of them. What I didn't tell him is, not anymore. I know my boundaries. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Our last storyteller of the evening is a fan favorite. I'm so happy to see her, Phoebe Potts. Thanks so much for joining us. We love you.
I take things personally because I'm a person, and that's how we take things. Apparently, so does my neighbor. He takes things personally, too. I met him for the first time just recently when he came over to introduce himself and to apologize for wanting to kill me. My neighbor and I have lived across the street from each other for 14 years and have only just met. We live on one of the busiest thoroughfares here in Gloucester, all day long. FedEx, UPS, ambulances, police cars, children, nurses, plumbers, all of your heating oil roars up and down Maplewood Avenue, creating this wall of civic and commercial noise that my neighbors and I use as a way to not know each other. But the other night, my neighbor broke through. It was late at night, and I'm sitting in our apartment, which is on the second floor. I'm by an open window, the light is on, and I have my computer open. My neighbor comes out of his house, stands on the stoop, and lit only by the street lamp, looks up at me, and starts shouting. So think Romeo and Juliet, except his Romeo is like a flabby senior citizen, and my Juliet is not looking for love. I'm online looking for a sweater. He starts shouting, and my antennas start twitching because I know exactly what frequency he's on. Because I grew up with people who drink. And I know that people who drink have truths that they need to share. But the problem with people who drink is that they don't always remember these truths. So this is where children like me come in. We are very reliable witnesses because we listen with a vigilance as if our lives depend on it, because oftentimes they do. So he starts shouting, and instinctively, I close the computer, I turn off the light, and I assume the position, crouched down by the open window in the darkness. You look down on us! Totally true. I live on the second floor. I literally look down on him. I look down on all my neighbors. You think you're better than us! Again, completely true. I do think I'm better. I'm not better, but I do think I'm better. And that's because I suffer from a condition known as the illusion of central position. It's because I contracted it very early as a child because I was raised on the corner of whiteness and Judaism and an exquisitely expensive education. So I was told I was special, and I was better, and I was different. And I've since been beaten down by life, but I do occasionally have flare-ups of my symptoms. When I'm doing something righteous, like composting, or voting for the right person, or when I explain to my 11-year-old that the movie he's watching, the superhero movie he's watching, is racist and misogynist and laced with a toxic narrative of American supremacy that was sanctioned in part by the Pentagon. I'm a fun mom. Go back to New York! How does he know I'm Jewish? Biden, Biden, Biden. So you voted for Biden. So now we have Biden. This is true. I did vote for Biden, and he knows this because 8 months ago I had a yard sign that said Biden. But I want to say to him, I don't like him either. He's not my candidate. I see him as just another establishment politician who's not going to give Medicare for all, who's not going to do anything meaningful for the children in cages on the border, who's not erasing my student loans, and who has the same foreign policy as every single one of his predecessors going back to the Monroe Doctrine. He's not my guy. I'm tired. Aren't you tired? I was tired of the other guy. I was tired and I wanted a break. I wanted to go back to that charade that it's all gonna come out in the wash if we all just work hard and are kind. Cunt, you're a cunt. You're nothing but a cunt. I don't wanna quibble. I'm not a cunt. I have a cunt. It's really different. He keeps saying it. Cunt, you're nothing but a cunt. You're a cunt, cunt, cunt. And I'm thinking, why is that a bad word? Why are you shouting that at me What have cunts ever done to you except give you one of the sublime physical experiences of your life? Given you children, given you grandchildren. Everyone you care about or trust is here by grace of a cunt. And while we're at it, who is in charge of the cunt account? Like, who runs the cunt brand? Because they've done a terrible job. I mean, cunts are like the least offensive body part. They're sort of like a Jane Austen character of an organ. Just sort of tucked away, their hands folded in their laps. They don't intrude, they don't trespass. Just, they're almost totally silent except for an occasional furtive sigh. You're not a nice neighbor. You never say hello. Is that true? I think that might be true. I do give his wife a nice big jolly hello and she smiles back, but every time I've seen him, his head is down and he's just in prayer over his cigarettes. I've never said hello to him, and that's terrible, because to me, hello, while it might seem like a low bar, is sacrosanct. If you don't say hello to me, I'm not sure I exist. I'm kind of like Siri or Alexa like that. Hello, Phoebe. Yes. I'm here. Hello. I exist. But just as I'm making up my mind to say hello and wave to him the next time I see him, he says, if you tried to say hello to me now, I'd shoot you. I'd just as soon shoot you as say hello to you. No. I might be a selfish, arrogant, leftist, democratic apologist, New York transplant with your least favorite genitalia. But those are not grounds for my execution. No, you don't get to kill me. I sit there in the darkness, he goes back inside, I'm afraid, and I'm thinking, if I should call the cops. And then I think, more guns and more men in the middle of the night is not gonna make me feel more safe. I wait and I wait and I wait, and he doesn't come back out. Okay, this story has two endings. One is full of fear and despair, the other one is full of hope and healing. We don't have enough time, so you're gonna have to choose. Do you want hope or do you want fear? Hope. All right, nice choice. The next day, I flag down his wife, I call her over, I tell her everything. She starts to cry, she's so sorry. She didn't hear because of the air conditioning. He's in a diminished state because of health reasons, and I start to feel the warmth of her humanity and his humanity. I say, look, I just need to know, is he gonna shoot me? She says, no. He's not gonna shoot you. He's not gonna shoot anybody, because I'm gonna kill him. The day after that, he comes over to our house. He introduces himself. He gives a blue ribbon apology. He says he's sorry, he doesn't remember what he said, but he believes that he said it, but he doesn't believe those things. He respects me, and he respects me as a neighbor. And then he does the thing that persons like me who take things personally really, really love. He asks me a question. Can you forgive me? I can. I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. And thank you to you all for being here tonight at FishTales. We are going to be back, possibly live, hopefully in December. Please sign up for the email blast at gloucesterwriters.org or see Kobe this evening to give us your email address so you can hear more about what's going on at the Gloucester Writers Center. If you would like to tell a story at the next FishTales, the theme is forgiveness. And that was not planned, by the way. You chose the ending. So we'll see you next time. Thank you for coming to FishTales.